The thing about humans, and I say this as someone who has studied 43 spacefaring civilizations across 6 galactic arms, is that they have absolutely no idea how terrifying they are. None. Zero. Not even a fraction of a clue. My name is Quell. I am a Vrethian, which means I have 4 eyes, 2 stomachs, a natural lifespan of 600 years, and a career in interstellar journalism that has taken me to the most dangerous, most politically explosive corners of this galaxy. I have reported from active war zones. I have sat across negotiation tables where the wrong sentence could start a planetary extinction event. I have interviewed warlords, tyrants, and one particularly unhinged philosopher king who believed the universe owed him an apology. Nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Station Vora 9, on the 42nd standard cycle of the Conclave Summit. Let me set the scene for you, because the scene matters a lot. Station Vora 9 is one of those gloriously ugly structures that only exists because 17 different civilizations built onto it over 400 years without ever once agreeing on an architectural style. It looks like a pile of scrap metal that somehow achieved orbit through sheer stubbornness. It smells like recycled air, machine grease, and whatever the Tunvaki delegates brought in their food storage units, which, frankly, should have been declared a biological weapon at customs. The Conclave Summit was supposed to be a celebration. 3 decades of peace between the Vreth Dominion, the Sovereign Collective, and the Tunvaki Brotherhood. Speeches, banquets, hollow promises dressed in expensive ceremonial robes. The usual. Humans had been invited as what the Sovereign Collective politely called observer species, which translated from diplomatic language into plain speech meant, "You are here because refusing your invitation would be awkward, but please do not touch anything or make loud noises." Humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel exactly 11 years before this summit. 11 years. For context, the Tunvaki Brotherhood had been spacefaring for over 2,000 years, the Vreth Dominion for nearly 4,000. The Sovereign Collective. Well, the Sovereign Collective stopped counting at some point because the number became philosophically uncomfortable. Humanity was, by every measurable standard, the newest, smallest, most technologically primitive species in that station. And yet, somehow, they had sent a diplomatic team of 12 people, 3 cultural liaisons, 2 medical officers, and for reasons that still puzzle me to this day, a child. Her name was Mira Osei. She was 9 years old, according to human age counting. She had what humans call braids, tight patterns woven into the dark hair on her head, and she wore a small pin on her jacket that apparently represented her home city back on Earth. She was the daughter of the lead human ambassador, a broad-shouldered, extremely calm woman named Delegate Adeze Osei, who had the eyes of someone who had seen bureaucratic nonsense at every level of existence and had simply decided to keep going anyway. Little Mira was not supposed to be at the summit, technically, but Delegate Osei had no childcare options. The journey was long, and apparently 9-year-old Mira had been informed she was going to space and had responded with such extraordinary enthusiasm that sending her back home would have been, as one human aide described it, genuinely not worth the argument. So there she was, 9 years old, in a corridor of Station Vora 9, looking at everything with enormous, curious eyes. And there was King Dorath Vel. Now, I need to explain King Dorath Vel to you, because understanding what happened requires understanding exactly the kind of creature this being was. Dorath Vel was the sovereign ruler of the Tunvaki Brotherhood, a civilization spanning 14 star systems and approximately 60 billion subjects. He was, by the Brotherhood's own reckoning, a living divine authority. Not metaphorically divine, actually divine, in the Tunvaki theological framework. His bloodline was considered a direct continuation of the creator beings who first seeded intelligent life in this quadrant of the galaxy. In practice, what this meant was that Dorath Vel had spent his entire life, all 340 years of it, being told that every thought he had was correct, every desire he expressed was righteous, and every action he took was by definition exactly what the universe intended. He was, to use a human expression I have since learned, absolutely insufferable. He was also enormous. Tunvaki are large beings, where humans top out around 2 meters in their tallest forms. Dorath Vel stood nearly 3.5 meters, armored in ceremonial gold-plated carapace, that added another visual layer of "I am extremely important, and you are not." His honor guard, 6 warriors in matching armor, flanked him at all times. His personal herald walked 3 steps ahead, announcing his presence in a loud, resonant voice before he entered any room, because apparently the universe needed advance warning that Dorath Vel was about to bless it with his presence. The corridor where it happened was one of those connecting passages between the banquet level and the observation deck, long, slightly dim, with viewport windows showing the stars outside. It was, by station standards, a quiet place. Not many beings used it during the banquet hours. Mira Osei used it, because she had apparently decided to go look at the stars on her own, in the way that 9-year-old children across all known species occasionally decide that they would like to do something and simply do it without consulting anyone. She was standing at one of the viewport windows when Dorath Vel's procession came through. His herald announced him. His honor guard marched. His robes, each one worth more than most planetary economies, swept the floor dramatically, and Mira Osei, who had never been taught to fear divine royalty because her species had only been in space for 11 years and had not yet developed the appropriate level of reverence for beings who considered themselves gods, turned around from the window and said, in a perfectly cheerful voice, "Oh, hello, are you one of the crab people? My mum showed me pictures, but you are way bigger in real life." There was a silence in that corridor that I can only describe as the sound of an entire cosmic order holding its breath. The herald stopped walking. The honor guard stopped walking. Even the station itself seemed to pause, the recycled air temporarily forgetting to circulate. Dorath Vel looked down and further down, at this small human child who had just referred to him, the divine sovereign of 14 star systems, as one of the crab people. Now here is where it could have ended in awkwardness and diplomatic notes and a quiet apology from Delegate Osei over a cup of whatever humans drink when they are mortified. That was the expected path, the reasonable path, the path that everyone in that corridor, including the 3 journalists who happened to be recording from the far end, including myself, who had wandered there looking for a quiet spot to review my notes, was expecting. Dorath Vel did not take that path. Dorath Vel was not built for reasonable paths. He was built for divine authority and absolute deference, and a 9-year-old had just called him a crab person, in a cheerful voice, with no malice, no fear, and absolutely no awareness that she had just committed what the Tunvaki legal code technically classified as an offense against the sacred order. He raised his scepter. It was ceremonial, yes, but it was also a functional weapon. The Tunvaki believed the sacred and the lethal should occupy the same object. The scepter could fire a concentrated energy burst, not lethal at low settings. Painful, very, very painful. He fired it at Mira Osei. I want you to understand, for the full weight of what follows, that this happened. That a 340-year-old divine sovereign of 14 star systems fired a weapon at a 9-year-old human child because she called him a crab person and did not bow. The blast hit her in the shoulder. She was knocked sideways. She hit the viewport hard. She made a sound, a sharp, small, surprised sound, and then she started crying. Not dramatically, not theatrically. Just the immediate, honest crying of a child who had been hurt and was scared and did not understand why. Dorath Vel straightened. His herald resumed speaking. His honor guard resumed marching. He continued toward the observation deck as if he had simply corrected a minor irritation and the universe had been restored to proper order. I stood there, with my recording equipment, in the kind of frozen shock that only occurs when reality does something so far outside the acceptable range that your brain needs a moment to confirm it actually happened. Then I heard footsteps, fast ones. I have covered war zones. I have heard the sound of things moving at dangerous speed. There is a particular quality to footsteps when the being making them is operating on something beyond rational calculation, beyond fear, beyond the normal social filters that keep civilized creatures from doing what their body is screaming at them to do. Delegate Osei came around the corner at that exact speed. She had heard her daughter cry. She took in the scene, the distance from Dorath Vel's procession to her daughter's position, the mark on Mira's jacket from the blast, the child on the floor, still crying, and the divine sovereign of 14 star systems walking away without having looked back once. She said nothing. She went to her daughter first. She knelt down. She checked the injury, which was painful but not serious, a burn through the jacket fabric, reddened skin beneath. She held Mira for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. 4 seconds of holding, and then she said, very quietly, into her daughter's ear, something I could not hear from my distance. Mira stopped crying. Not the gradual, hitching stop of a child calming down. A deliberate stop. As if something had been said that reorganized her priorities. Delegate Osei stood up. She turned toward Dorath Vel's retreating procession, and she said, in a voice that was perfectly, terrifyingly calm, "Stop." The herald stopped, because the voice said stop in a way that apparently transcended species and language and the entire concept of diplomatic immunity. Dorath Vel turned, slowly, with the practiced disdain of a being who had never once been told to stop in 340 years. He looked at Delegate Osei, human female, average height by human standards, which placed her at roughly half his size. No ceremonial armor, no honor guard, one medical badge on her jacket lapel, and a small communication device on her wrist. He made a sound that his herald immediately translated as, "The primitive addresses the divine." How quaint. Delegate Osei did not blink. She raised her communication device. She pressed 2 buttons. Then she said, still in that calm voice, "Your sovereignty, my daughter is 9 years old. You fired a weapon at a 9-year-old child. I need you to understand what you have just done. Not what you think you have done. What you have actually done." Dorath Vel's herald began a response about the sacred order and the offense against divine authority. Delegate Osei did not let him finish. She said, "I have just sent a priority transmission to Earth. It includes full recording footage from the station's corridor cameras, which automatically captured this incident. It includes my daughter's medical assessment. It includes your name, your title, your position, and the exact timestamp of what occurred." She paused. "Earth is currently in contact with 11 of the 14 star systems you govern. We have trade agreements with 4 of them. We have exploration partnerships with 2 more. And we have, your sovereignty, a very, very long memory." Another pause. "You have until the end of this summit to decide what you would like to do next." She turned. She picked up her daughter. She walked back the way she had come. The corridor was so quiet after that I could hear the stars outside the viewport windows. Or maybe that was just the sound of the known galaxy realizing that something had shifted in the balance of things, and nobody was quite sure yet what it meant. But I knew. I had covered enough political powder kegs to recognize the moment before ignition. And humanity, tiny, 11 years in space, barely a blip on the galactic radar, humanity had just lit the match. I opened my own transmission device with slightly trembling fingers, and I sent the footage to every major news network in 6 galactic arms. Then I sat down on the corridor floor, because my legs had stopped cooperating, and I thought, oh, this is going to be extraordinary. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. The footage reached Earth in 6 hours. 6 hours, because that is how long a priority transmission takes to cross the relay stations between Vora 9 and the blue planet sitting quietly in its unremarkable solar system, doing what it had been doing for 4.5 billion years, which is simply existing with absolutely no idea what the rest of the galaxy thought of it. I know the exact timeline because I tracked it, professionally, obsessively, because I, Quell of the Vrethian Press Corps, had sent that footage out into the galaxy, and I was now sitting in my station quarters watching what happened next with the focus of someone who has just accidentally thrown a rock into a beehive and cannot stop staring. The first response came not from Earth's government. It came from something humans call the Internet. Now, I had studied human communication networks as part of my pre-assignment research. The briefings described the Internet as a global information sharing system used for commerce, education, and social interaction. What the briefings did not adequately convey, what no briefing in any language could have adequately conveyed, was the speed and collective temperature of that system when humans decided, together, simultaneously, and with extraordinary commitment, that they were angry. Within 40 minutes of the footage going public, the phrase "he shot a child" had been repeated in 47 human languages, approximately 900 million times. Within 2 hours, every sitting government official on Earth had released a statement. Some of those statements were carefully worded and diplomatic. Some of them were not. The Prime Minister of one particularly direct human nation released a statement consisting of exactly one sentence, which when translated into standard galactic common read, "We are aware of the situation and we are handling it." The tone in which that sentence was delivered apparently made several Earth-based political analysts describe it as, quote, "the calmest threat ever spoken by a head of state." Within 4 hours, human civilians had begun showing up outside the Tunvaki diplomatic missions on Earth. Not rioting, not destroying anything, just standing there, quietly, holding photographs of Mira Osei, thousands of them, in city after city on every continent, in the dark and the rain and the cold, just standing there and looking at the buildings. A Tunvaki diplomatic aide who was inside one of those missions later described it to a journalist as, "the most frightening thing I have ever experienced, and I have served in 3 active military engagements." When asked why, he said, "Because they were not angry. They were decided." Back on Vora 9, the summit had, predictably, collapsed into the kind of spectacular diplomatic wreckage that makes careers for journalists and nightmares for ambassadors. Every delegation had seen the footage. Every delegation had opinions. The Vreth Dominion contingent, my own people, had quietly relocated their seating arrangement to the opposite side of the banquet hall from the Tunvaki Brotherhood, which in Vrethian diplomatic language is the equivalent of a very loud statement indeed. The sovereign collective, who are by general consensus the most politically maneuverable civilization in this part of the galaxy, had done something almost elegant. They had said nothing, publicly, but every single one of their delegates had, individually and apparently independently, gone out of their way to greet Delegate Osei and her daughter during the course of that day, stopping by, asking after Mira's health, bringing small gifts, foods from their home worlds, a carved stone token from the collective's eldest delegate, who was 900 years old and had the eyes of someone who had watched civilizations make catastrophic mistakes before and recognized the signs. Mira Osei, for her part, was reportedly doing fine. The burn had been treated, she had eaten something, slept a little, and according to the human aide who briefed the press corps, had asked her mother whether she would get to see more of the station before they left. 9 years old. Dorath Vel had not apologized. Of course he had not apologized. Divine sovereigns of the Tunvaki Brotherhood do not apologize. The theological framework does not contain a mechanism for it. You cannot apologize when you are by doctrinal definition incapable of being wrong. His official statement, released through his herald, described the incident as a, quote, correction of a breach of sacred protocol, and suggested that the human delegation review the appropriate customs for approaching divine authority before any further interaction. I watched that statement come through on my feed and I made a sound. I am not entirely sure what kind of sound it was. Something between a laugh and the noise a Vrethian makes when they witness something that is both hilarious and genuinely dangerous, which is a very specific emotional state for which we have a word but no good translation. Because here is what Dorath Vel, in 340 years of divine authority and absolute deference, had never needed to learn. Here is the thing that no one in his entire life had ever been in a position to teach him. Humans do not have a mechanism for backing down when a child is involved either. The human delegation formally requested an emergency session with the Conclave Oversight Committee. The request was granted within the hour. This was by Conclave standards extraordinarily fast. Conclave Oversight Committees typically take 3 to 5 standard cycles to convene. They convened in 4 hours. I was in that chamber. Press credentials, back row, recording everything. Delegate Adeza Osei stood before the committee alone. No aides, no co-delegates, just her, in her formal jacket with the small city pin still on the lapel and a data tablet in her hand. She did not raise her voice once during the entire proceedings. I timed it. 47 minutes. Not once. She laid out, in precise, sequential, completely unembellished language, exactly what had occurred, exactly what injuries her daughter had sustained, and exactly what the human government's position was. Then she said something that made the entire chamber go very, very quiet. She said, I want to be clear about what we are not doing. We are not declaring a conflict with the Tunvaki Brotherhood. We are not withdrawing from the summit. We are not asking for a punishment to be imposed by this committee. We are observers here, and we respect the committee's authority. A pause. What we are doing is notifying this body, formally and on record, that humanity considers this incident unresolved, and that humanity has a particular cultural characteristic that I believe this committee should understand before any further decisions are made. The committee chair, a Vrathian elder named Sovath, who had been running these proceedings for 200 years and had the permanently tired expression of someone who had seen everything, leaned forward slightly and said, "And what characteristic is that, Delegate?" Delegate Osei looked at him. Then she looked at the full committee, slowly, one face at a time. Then she said, "We remember." 2 words. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Not as a threat, as information. We are 11 years into galactic contact. We have met 46 spacefaring species in that time. We remember every single interaction. We remember the ones who were kind. We remember the ones who were neutral. And we remember the ones who were not." Another pause. Humanity's memory operates on a civilizational timescale. We hold things for generations. We are, as a species, extraordinarily patient when we choose to be. She set the data tablet down on the table in front of her. "And we are extraordinarily persistent when we choose to be that instead." She picked the tablet back up. She nodded to the committee. She said, "That is all we wanted to put on the record. Thank you for your time." And she left. I sat in that back row for approximately 3 minutes after she walked out, doing nothing except processing. Then I started writing. The story ran across every major Vrathian news network within 6 hours. The headline I chose was, "Humanity addresses the conclave, 2 words that may have changed everything." My editor called it understated. I told him he had not been in that chamber. Now, here is where it gets complicated, which is a word I am using because the alternative words are all significantly more alarming. The Tunvaki Brotherhood had 14 star systems, 60 billion subjects, a military force that most civilizations in this quadrant politely decline to antagonize. They were, by any rational power assessment, untouchable. Humanity had 1 star system, 8 billion people. Ships that, compared to Tunvaki military hardware, were charmingly optimistic. On paper, this was not a confrontation. This was an observer species registering a formal complaint. And yet, over the next 3 standard cycles, something happened that I have spent considerable time trying to explain in my subsequent writing. With mixed success, the 14 star systems of the Tunvaki Brotherhood started receiving messages, not from Earth's government, not from the human diplomatic corps, from individual humans, scientists who had been in active research partnerships with Tunvaki academic institutions sent polite but firm notes explaining that they were pausing those collaborations pending resolution of an outstanding concern. Business entities that had been in trade negotiations sent similar notes. Individuals who had been in correspondence with Tunvaki counterparts, cultural exchanges, artistic collaborations, even just friendly connections made at prior summits, sent messages saying in various styles and tones that they were aware of what had happened and were watching, not threatening, not hostile, just watching. The cumulative effect of 60 million individual humans simultaneously and independently deciding to apply a very quiet, very personal, very patient form of pressure was something that the Tunvaki Brotherhood's diplomatic corps had no framework for handling. Their system was built for governments, for militaries, for formal declarations and structured responses. They had protocols for war, and protocols for peace, and protocols for everything in between. They had no protocol for 60 million individual people who had simply decided to remember. I interviewed a Tunvaki diplomatic analyst, off the record, during the 2nd standard cycle. He was a reasonable being, pragmatic, the kind of professional who deals in realities rather than theology. He agreed to speak because I think he needed to say the thing out loud to someone. He said, "We do not understand how they coordinate this. There has been no central directive, no government instruction. Our intelligence indicates that these messages are completely spontaneous. Individuals acting independently, all arriving at the same response, at the same time." I said, "Yes." He said, "How?" I said, "They saw a child get hurt." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is the whole answer, is it not?" I said, "That is the whole answer," he said, quietly, almost to himself. We made a significant error in our assessment of this species. I did not tell him how significant. I did not think it would help. On the 5th standard cycle after the incident, Dorath left the summit. He announced it as a scheduled departure. No one on the station believed this, but everyone allowed the fiction to stand, because sometimes fiction is the scaffolding that holds negotiations together while the actual structure is repaired. Before he left, something happened that his herald did not announce and his honor guard did not ceremonially mark. He passed Delegate Osei in a corridor. Not the same corridor, a different one. Near the shuttle bays, busy with station traffic, she was walking with Mira, who was carrying a small model of the station that the Sovereign Collective's eldest delegate had apparently helped her build from parts in the station's recreation center. Mira was explaining something about it to her mother, in the animated, detailed way of children who have become very interested in a subject. Dorath stopped. His procession stopped with him. He looked at the child. Mira looked up, saw the Tunvaki king, tilted her head. Dorath's herald began the formal announcement of his presence. Dorath raised one massive hand and the herald stopped speaking. Dorath said something, in Tunvaki, low, not formally projected, not meant for the corridor. Just said. His herald, looking extremely uncertain about the appropriate protocol for this moment, translated it quietly. The sovereign acknowledges the child's resilience. Mira Osei looked at the enormous armored 3.5-meter divine ruler of 14 star systems for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, I like your armor. The gold parts are really shiny." Something happened in Dorath's face. I was 20 meters away and I still saw it. Some shift, small, fast, and then gone, like a door opening and closing in the same second. He inclined his head, just slightly, a gesture his honor guard had probably never seen him make before, because it was not an incline of authority or acknowledgement of a peer. It was something else, something quieter. Then he walked on. Delegate Osei watched him go. Then she looked down at her daughter. She said something. Mira laughed. The easy, uncomplicated laugh of a child who has been hurt and healed and moved on, the way children do, with a speed and completeness that adults spend their whole lives being jealous of. I wrote that scene down in my personal notes, not for publication, just to keep, because here is the thing about what humanity did in the aftermath of that incident. The thing that I have spent 3 years since trying to articulate to other species who ask me what humans are actually like. What it actually means that this species is out here among the stars now. They did not forgive Dorath. Let me be very clear about that. The formal record stands. The incident is documented. The Tunvaki Brotherhood spent the following year navigating the reputational and diplomatic consequences with the painstaking difficulty of an organization that had never once had to consider reputation before. But they also did not burn anything down. They did not mobilize, did not demand, did not issue ultimatums with military backing they did not yet have. Instead, they put it on the record. They made sure every civilization in the conclave knew exactly what had happened and that humanity had not forgotten it. They applied patient, persistent, 60 million person pressure through 1,000 small individual choices, and they let Dorath live with the awareness that every single one of those 60 billion subjects in his 14 star systems now had a connection, however slight, to a species that remembered. One sovereign collective diplomat told me, over a drink 2 years after the summit, that in 900 years of watching civilizations grow from single-world species into galactic powers, she had never seen a species weaponize reputation and memory and patience with the efficiency that humanity had demonstrated in those 5 standard cycles. She said, "They are frightening because they are not trying to frighten anyone. They are simply being exactly what they are, and what they are is something we do not have a category for." I asked her what category she would create if she had to. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "Relentless decency, the kind that has edges." I wrote that down too, published it. It became, somewhat to my surprise, the most quoted line in anything I have ever written. Mira Osei went back to Earth with her mother at the end of the summit. She reportedly went back to school, reportedly told her classmates she had been to space and seen the crab people, and that they were very big but not as scary as everyone made them sound. Her teacher reportedly sent a note home asking for clarification. Delegate Osei reportedly sent back a 3-page summary of the summit with a small note at the bottom that said, "She is not wrong. The conclave adopted 3 new protocols in the year following the Vora 9 summit. One of them covered the treatment of diplomatic family members on conclave stations. Another covered response procedures when a sanctioned weapon is fired in a non-conflict zone. The third, and most quietly significant, covered the documentation and formal acknowledgement requirements when an incident involves a protected non-combatant minor of any species. All 3 were proposed by the human delegation. All 3 passed with unanimous support. All 3 are now standard across every Conclave affiliate station in the 6 galactic arms. 11 years in space, 60 million individual humans who saw footage of a 9-year-old girl get knocked down by a divine king and decided, completely independently, to simply remember it and act accordingly. 3 new Conclave protocols, proposed by the smallest, newest, most technologically modest species at the table. I have been a journalist for 200 years. I have watched species rise and collapse and transform into things their founders would not recognize. I know what political power looks like. I know what military power looks like. I know what economic power looks like. I had never, before humanity, seen what you might call moral gravity, the kind of weight that comes not from ships or weapons or wealth, but from an entire civilization simply deciding, consistently and persistently and in 60 million individual voices, that some things matter and they are going to act like those things matter, forever, across generations, without being asked. Dorath Vel ruled his 14-star systems for another 60 years after Vora 9. History records him as a significant political figure of the mid-conclave era. It also records in a footnote that has been read more times than the main entry, that he was the king who shot a child at a peace summit, and that the child species responded by changing how every civilization in the galaxy treats children in conflict zones. Mira Osei grew up, became a xenobiologist, published work on cross-species neurological development that is still being cited 50 years later. She visited Tunvaki space twice, professionally, and by all accounts was received with a specific quality of careful respect that locals described as, quote, complicated to explain but very sincere. She kept the jacket, the one with the burn mark, kept it in a frame. When journalists asked her about it, she reportedly said, "It is a reminder that the galaxy is big and strange and sometimes scary and sometimes wonderful, and usually both at the same time." When they asked if she was angry about what had happened, she said, "I was 9. I cried, and then my mum talked to me, and then I was fine." When they asked what her mother had said, she smiled and said, "You are a human being, and human beings do not stay down." I keep that quote in my personal files. I keep it because in 30 years of covering this species, from that corridor on Vora 9 to now, from 60 million messages to 3 conclave protocols to a xenobiologist with a framed jacket, I have come to believe it is the most accurate summary of humanity I have ever encountered. They do not stay down. Not out of stubbornness, not out of aggression, not out of pride, simply because getting back up is to them the only logical next step. The galaxy had better keep learning that. Something tells me humanity is just getting started.